Yes, great. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the launch of the 2022 Cocoa Barometer report. Those here, those online, we welcome you from wherever that you are joining us, from Asia, America, Africa, wherever. You are welcome to the start of the event. Without wasting any more time, we'll hand you over to our crew in Montpellier to take over. So, Antonie, you can take over from here.
Thank you very much, Obed. Before I start, I want to thank Obed Owusu-Addai from EcoCare in Ghana, who is also one of the founders and spokespersons of the Ghanaian Civil Society and Cocoa platform. We're hosting the 22 Cocoa Barometer launch today from two places. Myself and Isaac Gyamfi from Solidaridad, West Africa. We are currently in Montpellier, France, for the International Symposium on Cocoa Research. But joining us from Accra are quite a few of our friends, of our allies, and others as well in Accra, in Ghana, where we're going to be talking about the Cocoa Barometer, a biennial document on the state of sustainability of the cocoa sector. What we're going to do today is three separate elements. I'm going to start by giving you a short overview of the key messages in the barometer. After that, we will have a discussion in Accra with a variety of stakeholders. We have several cocoa farmers, we have some policymakers, we have a very rich forum of West African voices to actually reflect on the key messages and bring forward their positions on what they feel needs to happen. And after that, we'd like to open the floor for questions and answers, both from the people in the audience in Accra, as well as from people online joining us from across the world. We have almost 200 people dialing in as we speak, and quite a few familiar faces, and also quite a few faces that I have not seen before. My name is Antonie Fountain. I am the director of the Voice Network. We are an umbrella association of NGOs and trade unions working on sustainability in cocoa. And we host the Cocoa Barometer Consortium, which is a network of about 30 organizations across the world. And every 2 years, we release the Cocoa Barometer. And if we could show the screen, if we can show the slide, the starting slide, then we can go through the presentation. This Cocoa Barometer has been written by myself and by my colleague Friedel Adams, who sadly cannot join us today for this call because he is involved in important meetings around pricing and market mechanisms in the cocoa sector that were also planned at the same time. And so he sends his apologies. If we can go to the next slide already, the Cocoa Barometer starts with an overview of the key challenges that we have in the cocoa sector. And I like to always talk about it as a problem tree. And we've got two big branches on this tree. And the one big branch is on human rights. And in those human rights, we see issues such as child labor, poverty and malnutrition. We see a lack of education, a lack of infrastructure. And we see also labor rights violations and unsafe working conditions. The other major branch on the tree of cocoa is that of environmental protection, where we deal with issues like deforestation and land degradation, where we talk about loss of biodiversity, high use of agrochemicals and climate change and other challenges that are there. But both of these branches stand on a tree trunk, so to speak, of farmer poverty. Farmers do not earn a living income, and in fact earn very far from a living income. And we argue in this barometer, and I'm going to try to unpack that a little bit more in the coming minutes, that this is largely due to low farm gate prices and partly due to low yields, that there are rising production costs, and the cost of living crisis that we're seeing sweeping through West Africa at the moment is wreaking havoc on the livelihood conditions of farmers. And farmers also have to bear significant risks. Now, I want to unpack that a little bit before we start looking at solutions. And so the Cocoa Barometer starts really with the root cause of everything, where we look at living income. And if you look at the last 15 to 20 years, and Isaac and myself have been involved in the cocoa sector for a very long time, slowly increasing acknowledgement of the fact that farmer poverty is a problem has come to the forefront. But the solutions so far have largely been focused on if we could just get the farmers to grow more cocoa, the problem would be solved. And in fact, a big part of the messaging that we're hearing in Montpellier this week on cocoa research is about, oh, how can we get the farmers to grow more cocoa? But there's not really a business case to grow too much cocoa. It might be very good for the international multinationals, but the question is does it make sense to always want to increase your productivity as a cocoa farmer? And we've been modeling new data, new research, because for a long time, a lot of data wasn't available, but slowly we're getting more grip on what's taking place. And we've been able to actually come up with some calculations. And if we could skip 2 slides by now, please, I'd like to spend some time looking at a graph that we see here, which is really a new model that we're launching today, where you can actually see how does higher productivity actually affect the income of the average cocoa farmer. Now, these are stats for Cote d'Ivoire on the left, Ghana on the right. And what you see there are 4 different scenarios. And the green scenario is the average farmer's scenario as we speak. So we're looking at 550 kilos per hectare, which is the average cocoa farmer in Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana, taking about 75 labor days per hectare in order to grow the cocoa properly. Now, the argument has always been, but if they would just get to 800 kilos or to 1,000 kilos, or a slide I saw 2 days ago, 1,500 kilos, then the problems would be solved. But that is very often not the case, because actually raising productivity is something that costs money. It costs money in the labor, it costs money in the inputs that you need to get. And we're trying to show that here. If you look at this graph, the wider the bar, the more labor days it takes to get there. If you try to go to 800 kilos per hectare, it takes almost twice as much time as the current 550. If you try to get to 1,000 kilos, it'll take probably around 200 days. Now, this is data that's supplied to us by companies. So this is not our pessimistic interpretation. These are the numbers that companies have given us. We think it takes this much time to get there. And if you then run the model, you'll see that actually the higher the bar is, the closer you are to a living income. And you'll see that both in Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana, 550 is almost the optimum productivity before you actually start losing living income. Now, there is a big caveat there. This is the average farmer. If you look at the brown graph here, the 350 kilos per hectare, that is the state for half the farmers are growing not more than 350. And for them to get to the average level, there actually still is a business case there. One of the arguments that we've been hearing from companies and governments for years is, oh, our farmers need to grow more cocoa, and we don't understand why all of our sustainability programs are not leading to higher productivities. Farmers should be better farmers. They should be better businessmen. They should be actually making better informed choices. If you look at this graph, you might actually turn that argument around and say that it already is actually a very good business practice to not go to too high, because you know that it's more work than it actually will deliver. And the reason for that is because all of the models that we've seen so far have not looked at the availability of labor, because doing the work costs labor, and every household only has a certain amount of adult laborers. And if you think that there is an unlimited amount of labor available that is free and that is unlimited, then it's no surprise that many households do have to turn to their children to help, because there are no adults available to do the work. And so putting in place a remunerative price also helps in that part of the conversation. And we have taken the same model, and if we can go to the next slide, we have taken the same model and looked at what does it mean, not if you just increase productivity, but what would it mean in all of these different scenarios to the net income of farmers if we would increase the price by 50% or even double the price. And then you see that at the current average levels, all of a sudden the average family gets a lot closer to a living income. Now, it is important to state here, this is the average family, and many families are not average. So let's say you only have one adult in the household. Let's say you're a female-headed household. Let's say you've got a lot more children. Things become a lot harder to actually reach a living income already. So this is in kind of the good case scenario of an average family. There are quite a lot of families that do not live up to that situation, and for whom the situation is therefore a lot harder. Now, one of the arguments often given, but if we would raise prices, this would lead to significant overproduction all over the world. That is the case, indeed. Higher prices can lead to overproduction, but they're not the only driving factor. If we look at the next slide, we have looked at an indexed growth of cocoa in a lot of different cocoa producing countries, in Ecuador and Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana and in Indonesia, the 4 biggest cocoa growing nations in the world. And we have looked at what is their growth compared to the price of cocoa. And you can see that the price of cocoa and the growth of cocoa production in that country do not necessarily correlate. And that's because government policies are equally as important in driving the growth or the reduction of cocoa than prices, because you will see that in the last 10 years, we've indexed in 2010, 2011, so 10 years ago, you'll see Ghana and Indonesia have decreased their product production, and Cote d'Ivoire and Ecuador have increased their production. This is with the same price dynamics. It's not just price, policies matter. Now, living income is the key of the conversation, but going forward, we also want to look at the branches. When we look at the challenge of environmental protection, we're looking at a continued menace of deforestation across the world in cocoa production, not just in West Africa, but also the Congo Basin in Central Africa is under threat. The Amazon Basin in Latin America is under threat, as are the remaining rainforests in Indonesia. And so putting in place deforestation measures, both at a corporate as well as at a legislative perspective, are really important. In that context, the announcement made yesterday by the European Union on deforestation regulation is a good step forward, although there are some major caveats to that as well. It seems that a lot of the concerns brought forward by producer governments have not been taken into consideration, and particularly the needs assessment and the support for smallholder farmers is going to be essential in any regulation like this, and we're afraid that that might be missing in that regulation. Coupled to deforestation directly is climate change. Rainforests are rain machines. You cut down the rain machines, you change rainfall patterns. West Africa isn't dealing with a future of climate change. West Africa is already dealing with a now of climate change. The harmattan comes down earlier every year, it leaves later every year, it lasts longer every year. There are some real challenges that climate change is bringing. Now, it's not only that certain areas are becoming less appropriate to climate change, other areas might become more appropriate, but it is a highly invasive change is climate change. Beyond climate change, we're looking at issues around agroforestry as possible solutions. We're actually one slide earlier still. Yes, perfect. Agroforestry is a major driver forward, we think, for trying to find solutions for a wide range of issues. It can help with reforestation, it can help with rewilding and biodiversity, it can help farmers gain a more stable and resilient income, it can help in pests and disease solutions as well. And so agroforestry is a really important part of the way forward, but it shouldn't just be one or two trees together. It really needs to be as diverse in agroforestry as possible. However, doing diverse agroforestry also requires labor. And I think that requires further study and research to see what's the business model on the labor in agroforestry as well. I think that's an open question going forward. When you look at the environmental protection branch, that's one issue. When you look at the human rights protection branch, that's another major issue where we see a continued instance of a lot of children working on farms in West Africa, doing work that they shouldn't be doing. So it's not just that it's helping out on the farm after school, but there's quite a significant amount of hazardous labor, age-inappropriate labor. And I think in that context, it's important to understand the definitions of what we're talking about in this. And this is why the child labor framework is very important. Both in Ghana and in Cote d'Ivoire, national governments define what is and what is not appropriate labor. And I think it's very important to keep the conversation in child labor around these national definitions and understanding that it's not a Western concept that's brought forward by Washington or Geneva or Brussels, but really understanding the local contexts within that. But within the local hazardous activity frameworks in Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana, 1.56 million children are still doing work that they should not be doing at that age. And we really need to see an improvement there. The good news is that over the last decade, there is good news in that there are more children in child labor, but on average, the amount of activities they do is reducing. The severity of the kind of work that they are involved in is also getting better, but we are still far from solving the problem. And there is an absolute increase because people are growing more cocoa, and so more people are growing cocoa, and so therefore more households are involved in growing cocoa, and therefore more children are. And so it remains a topic to be very vigilant on. Beyond the child labor conversation, we look at labor rights violations and unsafe working conditions. This is a problem not just in West Africa, but if you also look at the increase in cocoa production in Latin America, where often the plantations are of larger scale and there's a lot more wage workers involved. This is where unionization and labor rights become very, very important. Access to education and access to healthcare remain major challenges that are primarily a responsibility for governments and not so much something that companies are responsible to solve all on their own. Underlying all of this is the problem of poverty, but cross-cutting through all of the issues that we've just been talking about, whether that is environmental protection, human rights, or living income, is the issue of gender equality. And we want to keep banging that drum because it is incredibly important that women's equality becomes a key part of all of the solutions going forward, because women's rights, it's a rights issue in and of itself, but also because bringing women in as change agents is so much more efficient to tackle these issues as well. So it's an issue of rights. It's also an issue of being efficient in all of these challenges. And the last thing around gender equality as well is we have so many programs that are already set up, but many of them are set up in a gender agnostic way. And when they don't specifically target women's rights, what they do is they might actually contribute to a further splitting up of men getting the access to the things that they need and the women not getting the access to the things that they need, and thereby creating more gender inequality rather than less. And that's why all interventions, all systems, all programs that are designed in this sector really must make sure that they look at gender equality and how to actively ensure that women are brought into the conversation, that they actually have access to trainings, that they have access to inputs, et cetera, in a way that really makes a concrete difference in reality. And so therefore also trying to take away thresholds and for women to participate. So also making sure that the opportunity cost for women to participate gets compensated in different levels. We could do a whole webinar around just gender equality. I wish I had more time. I don't. Another issue, and this is really new that we're bringing into this Cocoa Barometer, is the issue, next slide please, by the way, around racism, representation, and decolonization. When I first went to West Africa more than a decade ago, all of the farmers there were saying the thing that would really help us is a higher price. And somehow for 10 years and more, that's never been a point for serious discussion in the cocoa sector. Why not? Part of our argument is we don't want to look at price because the decisions are made in the corridors of power in Europe and the United States, or in the boardrooms of the large multinationals, and it is not in their interest to raise farm gate prices. The issue of not having the people who are actually involved in the day-to-day reality, not having them represented in the discussions, not having them at the decision-making table means that the decisions are taken by people who have other interests. And so therefore representation, and also the roots of colonialism, because we can see the structures of how the cocoa trade and all commodities are traded find their history in centuries of European and American exploitation of the rest of the world. And those structures remain till this day. And we need to challenge those issues. We need to actually fight against that. And I think that we really need to start deconstructing how we think the world should work. And starting by making sure that people who actually are part of this get to have a seat at the table, not just to approve what is being said, but to actually be able to influence and co-decide on what is being said. And so this is really a new chapter that we've really brought in as a full chapter to the barometer. We've also looked at market developments. And so those are the next few slides. If you look at the global cocoa production, we still see that West Africa is the core driving powerhouse, and the main consumption is in Europe and in the United States. I think it's important to point out the increasing production in Latin America. And we have not put this in the barometer, also because Friedel, my co-author, and myself have a bit of a backwards and forwards around this. But I think there's actually a real chance that, considering the current developments, Ecuador might overtake Ghana as the #2 producer of cocoa sometime in the next decade. I think that we are looking at a shift in balance there at the moment. And that's a real threat to West African cocoa production in general, because in Ecuador and in Peru, there is less of a threat around deforestation. And there also is less of an issue on some of the human rights issues, particularly around children being involved in hazardous activities on the farm. And so I think it really is also a challenge to West Africa to get moving on some of these processes that have actually taken quite some time to get off the ground. So these are some really interesting developments. If you look at the next slide, I was about to say, if you look at the next slide, but it's the slide after that, we can look at the tonnages of companies, etc. When we started doing this Cocoa Barometer more than 10 years ago, what we were asking companies was like, how much of your cocoa is sourced as certified as Fair Trade or Rainforest Alliance or UTZ certified? By now, there's such a wide range of certifications and programs. We have started to ask how much of your cocoa is sourceable and traceable, because we find the traceability aspect to be incredibly important to farm and to cooperative level. And so we're starting to see that traceability is increasing, but it's particularly in the untraceable part that most of the big problems are happening. And so that really requires significant challenge. I accidentally skipped the previous slide. I do want to go back to that, because that's one of the key issues going forward around pricing, and that is looking at supply and demand. I was just talking about Ecuador starting to overtake Ghana as a major sourcing country. We are continuously seeing an increase of cocoa production in the world. We've also seen the living income differential implemented by Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, but that hasn't been coupled with any serious attempts to reduce the supply of cocoa. And in the end, the world market does find its price balance based on supply and demand. And without proper supply management, without making sure that we start looking at how much cocoa is there on the market, we are actually going to be struggling to make a lot of our activities work. Now, we are hoping to come to the end of this part of the presentation so that there are some questions. I've got a few more slides. If we can go to the slide on enabling environment, which is the next slide. The problems in cocoa do not happen only on the cocoa farm. The solutions for cocoa do not lie only on the cocoa farm. And in fact, they lie much more in the enabling environment, in the legislative environment, in the transparency that the governments have, in in the setting up of infrastructure. All of these issues that are there are a key part of the way forward. And part of that is around transparency and accountability and traceability in supply chains. And we saw in the previous slide that there is a lack of traceability. And the current slide that you look at, we can see that more than half of the cocoa sourced from, this is in this case Cote d'Ivoire, but there's probably similar statistics in Ghana, is actually of unknown origin or of indirect origin. How can you tackle the problem of deforestation? How can you tackle the problem of hazardous child labor? How can you tackle the problem of farmer poverty if you don't even know where you're buying your cocoa from? We must have completely traceable supply chains if we're going to solve this. Now, companies need to step up their game here significantly and need to stop hiding behind excuses. At the same time, in Cote d'Ivoire, for example, this requirement that 20% of sales goes through national traders means that either the Ivorian government is going to have to require national traders to be as transparent as the international traders, or they're going to have to let go of that requirement. One of those two is going to have to happen, or we're still not going to have the traceable cocoa that we need. Even just to comply to the EU regulation, we're going to have to know where the cocoa is coming from. Coming into land here, if we look at the three major challenges, I'd like to go to the next slide, please. If we look at the three major challenges around human rights, around environmental protection and living income, we've suggested a whole set of interventions that need to happen. Now, I'm going through this at breakneck speed with very little nuance because we don't have the time to do that. We have 126 pages in the Cocoa Barometer, and this slide tries to outline that in a very simplified version, but even this would require a lot of time to unpack. So I want to go to the slide after that. Actually, it's 2 slides further, to say the core of the issue that we're looking at in the path to a living income in cocoa is to look at 3 major intervention strategies. We need to look at what's happening at farm level and help farmers to implement their good agricultural practices. But we also need to look at good governance policies. And there's a couple of bullets that are probably going to come by if you click on that, if you could. These good governance policies are things like supply management, rural development policies, transparency and accountability, functioning cooperatives, traceability systems, rule of law, due diligence regulations, the rollout of infrastructure and the rollout of child labor monitoring and mediation systems, as well as voluntary savings and loans associations. All of this requires governments to increase their investments, to increase their transparency, and to increase their efforts, both in producer nations as well as in consumer nations. But besides these good governance policies, we also need to start looking at the good purchasing practices. The core business of chocolate multinationals is not to roll out sustainability programs in cocoa. It's to buy and sell cocoa and chocolate related products. It's in that core business that we need to see change. And that is around their purchasing practices, where we need to see companies pay much higher farm gate prices. And that does not need to be determined by the world market. You can choose to pay more if you want to. The price set at the world market is not a maximum. The price set by the Cote d'Ivoire and Ghanaian government every year, the minimum producer price, it actually is a minimum producer. It is not a maximum. Companies are free to pay more, and they should pay more in order to tackle the problem of poverty. But it's not just about price. It's also about the risk that is part of the pricing. Long-term contracts that actually bring more responsibility to the buyer and take risk away from the farmer is also what is needed there, as well as timely payments, because very often we see payments that come in very late, which also makes farmers vulnerable to other people that are coming in when they are very strapped for cash in the lean months. And we need to see a lot more transparency around payments of the lid. This is the way forward. Now, if you look carefully at the screen now, you'll see that the good agricultural practices are being faded out a little bit here. And that's because for the last 15 to 20 years, we've spent almost all of the efforts around the good agricultural practices. And we'd like to argue that where we need to see the real change going forward, we know what we need to be doing on good agricultural practices to a large extent. You know, we really know the way we need to be going. And the policy conversations and the true policy changes that we need to be focusing on right now are at the bottom of this pyramid, on governance and on purchasing practices. So if there is one thing of all the 126 pages in the Cocoa Barometer that we would like you to take with you in this, is let's start talking about what the governments and the companies need to do differently. And let's spend a little bit less time putting all of the burden on the backs of the farmers. Thank you. Over to you, Obed.
Thank you very much, Antonie, for walking us through the 2022 Cocoa Barometer report. And that was a very extensive look, an extensive overview. We will now have a quick, about 25-30 minutes panel discussion in-house. And I would like to now call up to take it's Madame Leticia Yankey of Cocoa Mmaa. She is the president and the founder of Cocoa Mmaa, as predominantly women cocoa cooperative. So please, can you join us on stage? And yeah, of late, she's also now a chocolate manufacturer. She's also doing her own chocolate, which is also very, very valuable. The second panelist is Mr. Ismail Pomasi. He is the chairman of the Council of Cocoa Abrabopa Farmers Association. Can you kindly also join us for a conversation? He represents a lot of farmers and farmer views, and we will be hearing from them. The last panel will be a policymaker, and he's one person that has been very, very instrumental in responding to civil society when we call upon him. He's not been in the space, in the governance space for a long time, but he's been very, very responsive. We'd like to call on Mr. Assanvo, the Executive Secretary of the Cote d'Ivoire Ghana Cocoa Initiative, to also join us. Great. So with these panelists, we will be discussing a couple of issues that were raised in the Cocoa Barometer report. And from the presentation that was made by Antonie, he has touched on a couple of them, but we will take the opportunity to re-emphasize and to also hear the perspective of the farmers and of policymakers on these issues. Thank you very much for joining us, panelists. We will quickly go through a couple of questions, and when we are done with our questions, we will also take from the people here, the audience here, and also online. The online conversation or the questions should not only be limited to the panel conversation, but also session that was made by Antonie. If you choose or one or two points you want to make, you are permitted to make those points. So we will start with the lady in our midst, Madame Leticia Yankey. During the presentation by Antonie, he touched on gender inequality, and it's something that I want us to go back to, especially you as a woman and a female farmer. I'd like to find out from you, with gender being a special reference to this new the Cocoa Barometer report. As a woman cocoa farmer and the president of all cocoa women cooperative, gender inequality affecting women cocoa farmers in producer countries, i.e. in Ghana and to a large extent in Cote d'Ivoire. I know you have a lot of conversation with our colleagues in Cote d'Ivoire. So to what extent is gender inequality becoming a problem for female cocoa producers in Ghana and in Cote d'Ivoire? Thank you.
Thank you, Obed, and thank you, everyone. I would like to apologize for being late. Actually, I was caught up in traffic, and I think I lost part of the conversation, but I think I will make it up. Yeah, as you could see, even with the panel discussion, the men were here before me, and you could just imagine what I was doing before coming. I had to put the house in order. In Africa, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire, you see that women, we do a lot of the house chore, and it also affects our cocoa production. For instance, there are so many activities that if it comes to cocoa production, women as women, we lack a bit. In terms of the actual work on the farm, like pruning, spraying, weeding, and other things, we cannot compare ourselves, or we can't compete equally with the men. And so you see that we lag behind. Sometimes the men are ahead of us. When it comes to training in terms of good agro practices, you see that most of the time the training at the grassroots, they consider the men. They normally call the men for the training, and we, the women, you are to stay in the house to put the house in order. When it comes to sharing of inputs, normally the men are considered first. When it comes to position, chief farmers, I'm yet to see in my community where I come from a woman chief farmer. Even though I won the national best most enterprising female cocoa farmer in 2019, in where my farm is still is a man who is a chief farmer. And I bet you I have even a bigger farm and better farm than him, but yet I cannot be the chief, the queen farmer, but always is chief farmer. And all these things affect us in emotionally, psychologically, and you see that it affects our production. For instance, when it comes to the practices like activities on the farm, the women will play all the role with the men. We collect the cocoa, we harvest everything, but normally the money belongs to the men. You see that in Ghana, we say that if you buy a gun, you always keep it in the chest of the man. And so everything that you acquire in the marriage belongs to the man. So all these things affect us. When it comes to maybe holding position in the maybe cocoa value chain, purchasing clerks, DOs, you see that the men dominate. And so there's the need for the women to be at par with the men in the cocoa production. So I would say that as women in the cocoa value chain, even in the cooperative aspect, you see that the men always sprint before the women. So there's a need for the women to be supported so that we can be at par with the men.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for that intervention. We'll take a comment from Mr. Pomasi. This year, 2022, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire marginally increased the farm gate prices of cocoa. And during the announcement to increase the cocoa prices, the arguments that were made by the two governments has always been that they can only give what have, and that most of the price determinants are determined by the international markets levels, and that the international market has not been improving. So you as a farmer and also as a chairman of Farmers Cooperative, to what extent has the pricing, especially the international price instability, been a moral breaker for as a farmer? The fact that the price keep going back down and up and unstable, and that your cost of production, in the arguments with most farmers, their cost of production is increasing, but the international market price is still not appreciating to that level. To what extent has that been a moral kind of issue, a factor for farmers and also for the farmer associations that you chair?
Thank you very much, Obed, and greetings to all the participants online. I think this is the 5th time or so that I have followed discussion on the Cocoa Barometer. And in all the discussions, you realize pricing always takes the center stage. And it appears that all the issues that surrounds sustainability, talking about the environment, talking about human rights, you always hear much voices when it comes to deforestation, when it comes to child labor issues. But then when it comes to the pricing, you realize that we give it a smaller tone. We don't really amplify discussion on the pricing. And I keep saying, I've been saying it, and I will say it today here again, that when you cannot talk about sustainability when you limit discussion on the pricing. The pricing is the engine of sustainability. And it's something that we must always look at. Now, let's take, for example, the issue of deforestation. And sometimes it's also a bit funny when we always try to make argument to look like cocoa production is what is really causing deforestation. To some extent, we agree, but to some extent, we cannot agree entirely. Why am I saying this? Let's look at even the recent development when it comes to illegal mining, and some farmers even having the will to give farms to illegal miners to go and destroy the farms. What would actually motivate a farmer, cocoa farmer, to give out cocoa land or cocoa farm to illegal miners to go and mine and destroy the farm and also destroy the environment? The issue is the farmer is looking at how much it costs to produce a bag of cocoa and how much revenue that you are deriving from a bag of cocoa. And I can tell you, let's look at even the price. And though there was a marginal increase in the pricing of cocoa in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, it was about 21%, moving from 660 cedis per bag to 800 cedis per bag, 21%. But then let's even consider the rate of inflation as we speak now. We're talking about close to 45%. And then you ask yourself, if you are getting 21% in your revenue as compared to inflation of almost 45%, are you better off or you are worse off? And this is as a result of the price at the international market that is not going up. We're talking about the industry that was over 130 billion, some researchers quote 130 billion dollar industry, and the farmer gets only 6%. This is highly unfair. It's so disincentive to cocoa farmer. So the farmer will always look at, is there any opportunities available? Where else can I actually make my livelihood? Can I continue to be in cocoa production when the cost of production exceeds the revenue that I'm getting? And it's indeed, it's true. If we look at how much it costs to produce a bag of cocoa, and you look at the price that we are getting, it's so disincentive. Let's look at even the price of cement as we speak now in this country. The price of cement is nearing 100 Ghana cedis. How can you sell a bag of cocoa and the only quantity of cement that you can buy will be around 9 bags? It's for me, it doesn't make, it doesn't make sense. So we have to look at the issue of the pricing, both at the international market and also at the local, because we are also talking about a local price, farm gate price, that the farmer is getting around 1/3 of the FOB price. And it's really not fair. As we speak now in dollar term, the farmer is getting about $61.5 per bag. When the bag is almost around, when you even use the Bank of Ghana exchange rates, it's around 150 per bag, dollars. And the farmer gets $61.5 dollars. And you cannot convince any farmer who would have any opportunity, whether it is a legal or illegal means. I don't want to normally mention the illegal means. The illegal means here, what I'm trying to say is farmers giving farmland for illegal miners when they promise them so much money, and the farmer has no option than to sell the land. Assuming you have 10-acre cocoa farm, and for the past 10 years, all your revenues put together, you are not even getting 50,000 Ghana cedis for the past 10 years. And an illegal miner promises you like 100 or 200,000 Ghana cedis. The temptation of giving out the land is very high. And don't forget that most of the farmers, the real farmers in the hinterlands, are not the actual owners of the farms. The farms belong to people who are in the cities. And once they begin to know that somebody is promising them so much money, they will push you to sell the land so that they will get their share of it. Talk about child labor. The report mentioned clearly what will be the motivation for farmers using their children to serve as laborers in our farms. It is only when you don't have enough money to pay for the labor that would actually move you to use the children to assist you in the farm. In any case, I've been saying it. Nobody loves the children more than the farmers, we ourselves. We love our children. The work that we are doing is not lucrative enough. We would wish we sponsor, educate our children to, go higher and actually get professionals that will be so lucrative for them, not like what we are doing currently. So what will be the motivation for stopping my children from going to school and to use them as laborers in the farm? Sometimes the definition of child labor, just like the research quoted, the definition is something that we need to look at as to whether what we have in the country, our definition of child labor, vis-a-vis socialization aspect of it, and how somebody might perceive, child labor to be. We have to look at it. But in any case, even if it is there, and farmers are actually using children in farms, what is the root cause? The root cause, as we all know, is poverty. There is a need for us to increase the cocoa price. We've had extensive discussion on deforestation, human rights, and all of that. I would wish that we also look at the issue of pricing and look at how much price would help the farmer meet his cost of production and make some revenue out of it, and also to attain the needed living income. So for me, once we are not increasing the price, and as it stands now, for the past 4 or 5 years, the price at the international market has always been around $2,300, $2,400. But I keep asking myself, what is really happening? Even when you look at the global inflation rate, IMF report is quoting around 8.9%, which tells everybody that inflation is really going up. Why is cocoa alone not going up? The chocolate manufacturers, every cost element that goes into chocolate production, the items are going up. And for that matter, the cocoa price must also go up. The cocoa price cannot be stagnant, and all other, cost elements are going up. We need good pricing and fair pricing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pomasi. Probably to pick up from where you left off, where you're talking about fairer cocoa pricing and farmer poverty, we want to put this question to Mr. Alex Assanvo as a policy implementer in this panel. Also, the 2022 Cocoa Barometer points or highlights the need for good pricing and the correlation between fairer pricing and cocoa sustainability and sustainable cocoa production. For you, Mr. Assanvo, as the head of the the Cote d'Ivoire Ghana Cocoa Initiative, what has been your observation on the correlation between the cocoa pricing and sustainable cocoa production, and what has your office been doing or plans to do to address these challenges?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Obed, and thank you for inviting us here. I would like to mention very clearly that on behalf of the two countries, I'm very pleased to be here in the context where I see a greater alignment. And I heard the farmers' voice, but also the report is exactly saying what you have been saying the past few months, the past few weeks, but also the past years. And as policymakers, when we listen, and I think the farmers and the last interventions have been saying everything. So we are not asking to pay more. We are just asking to pay the fair price. We are talking about a market that has been operating differently the past years, almost the past 10 to 15 years. Some programs have been developed. I think the report is very clearly mentioning and raising the fact that all these programs are still little in terms of size, in terms of volumes, but also are creating some limited impact. I will not say no impact, because there are some impact. When you get almost nothing from the price of the market and you get a premium, this is something. But still, this is putting the farmer in a trap. And I think this is where we governments, when we look at all the system, we try to protect farmer by creating this mechanism, the LID, which is achieving a floor price with a premium of $400 that will help removing that price from the volatility and the speculation. That was the ambition. And you all saw the recent weeks and months how we have to step up the pressure to ensure that people will respect the commitment. And I know that for some of you, everything seems so simple. But this, we are talking about the complex market. We are a residual part of this market. We can only impact the price that we are selling the cocoa to. And the fundamental of the market are very simply supply and demand. And today, sustainability is becoming the norm. But what is this norm? It's sustainability in which we are talking about three pillars: economic, social, and environmental. Over 20 years, most so-called sustainability programs were about productivity and a bit more social the recent years. But we heard the farmer telling us how price should be at the heart of everything. We hear some people saying, if we pay more, farmer will deforest, farmer will recruit more children. But in which world are we here? When we are standing up at the UN and we are saying that the UN development goals, decent farmer is a human right. And we are sitting here and people are telling us, sorry, if we pay more, you will go and deforest. But what is the root cause of it? And I think we heard from the farmer. We are not asking, even now, while we are talking about normal cocoa, but everyone talk about sustainability as a new norm. But how, if we are fighting to get better price now, and we are all talking about sustainability, what's the transition from where we are today in terms of purchase practices, in terms of transparency? How are we going to achieve sustainability if everything is about business as usual? Because that's a situation. We see regulation coming up. We hope this is going to drive transparency. Because today, as we are sitting here, we have seen several declarations and programs, but I'm not sure any company will be able to tell us where and how much they are buying from Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, simply because this is a strategic data point. But we have to produce, just produce. But everyone said, well, the market demand is under control and there is too much cocoa. Yes, this is a conversation we need to have. Supply management, as the report said, and I think the report highlights very well. There is a lot of cocoa from Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. I mentioned how productivity has been the driver the past years. But we also see continuous investment elsewhere. And I understand that's not the fault of Ecuador and everyone, but companies are investing elsewhere. This is what it's about. So how can we be sitting here? Supply management is now a critical point when people are going out and invest. This is why transparency is critical. So we welcome the European Union newly legislation. We have to welcome it, provided this is going to bring greater transparency. And we governments, we have taken our responsibilities. Before even the regulation come out, we have done census of farmers. Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana are implementing full national traceability system. Pension system are being deployed here in Ghana. And we hope by next year, harvest, October 23, we are going to roll out full transparency and traceability system. This has a cost, but this cost is not even featured in this market price we are talking about. So who is going to pay? There were a recent article mentioning, who is going to pay all this? Because cocoa of today is not being even paid cost of production. And Tomorrow, we all want sustainable cocoa. So who is going to pay for it? This is the question, because we governments, we are committed to do our effort and to play our role, to drive the transparency, to ensure that everything, and I think I heard about national actors in Cote d'Ivoire, but we are talking about the national traceability. That's no one left out. This is for everyone, I want to tell here. So that means that if people think that some people will be out of it, the national plan is to create level playing field. And that's what we are here about. So government, we are playing our role. Farmer has anyway always played a role, and they are feeling the pressure amplified by the current crisis in Ukraine and Russia, where we see indirect cost coming to our points and increasing food prices. All this is creating further pressure. And I heard how the price announced by the government is also impacting, because clearly is always a difficulty to ensure better price for farmer and greater transparency. So we are continue to play our role and hopeful that by delivering the full transparency, we will know who is buying our cocoa, where our cocoa is going. We will know when a sustainability program is being called out. We will know if this is part of the supply chain fully from the companies, because so far from the data point we have, so the sustainability programs represent very little from the global sourcing of some of the companies. Very little. But when you look at the report, you have the feeling all the cocoa is 100% sustainable. But what is sustainable? If you continue to buy in the market, traded cocoa, which is known as non-covering any cost of production. So it's very difficult. So together we are all working on it. So the initiatives itself has taken steps. Beside the living income differential, we are coordinating with the countries to deploy traceability program, national traceability program in coordinated way. But also, lastly, we have engaged through the recent conflict or protest that the countries have done to call up the countries to pay more. We have set up expert groups composed of few experts in different levels in the market, including even the countries, to ensure that we are going to look at what is the price mechanism that can help increasing or at least providing higher price to farmer. This is a difficult task. And we hope that early next year, we are going to get some output and willing to share here with the civil society and with the farmers, and also on behalf of Cocoa Board and Conseil Café Cacao, providing some rethink of how price can be developed with everyone playing the role. So that's the duty of the Cocoa Initiative. And we hope that we are going to achieve these first milestones, which is a price that can help getting more for farmers, but also deploying transparency that will be a unique selling point for a higher price for cocoa. So on this note, I would like to say thank you to the Voice Report for highlighting some of this challenge. I hope this is going to be reviewed by all stakeholders, including the European Union and many governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Assanvo, for your intervention. Since this event is a hybrid event, there are people online. We don't want to make them feel that they are not part of the event. So we will go online to Montpellier now to take the comments and reactions from those online. Then we will come back to this place and take a second round of questions. So over to you, Antonie and Isaac in Montpellier.
Many thanks, Obed. I'm actually not going to say anything right now, and Isaac is going to give a few reflections on what has been said so far. And after that, we'll try to pick up some of the questions that have been asked online.
Okay, super.
Thank you very much, Antonie. And thank you very much, all the audience online. It's certainly been a very, very brilliant conversation around the Barometer report and its launch. And I'm particularly excited by the panelist conversation around what needs to be tackled. And clearly, it's reinforcing the conclusions of the findings of this report. When I listen to Leticia, yes, there are key cross-cutting issues around gender that must be addressed. Who makes the decision at the household level for investments when the money comes? We would look forward to seeing Queen Mother farmers over time. Mr. Ismail made also very profound points that links up to the 3 pillars that the barometer concluded on as the key intervention areas that industry, governments, development investors, farmers must all focus on when he spoke about the price issue. I think pricing is so crucial. Paying a living income related pricing, a fair pricing, cannot be overemphasized. And if you listen to all the discourse around this afternoon, we don't want to over-massage it. The truth of the matter is that if we did that and the purchasing practices are done in the right way, say that there are long-term commitments in terms of contracting with farmers and the producer countries, there will be no incentive when the prices are good for people to produce more. You have a fixed quantity that you have signed on to in the medium term. So if I'm producing 2,000 kilos and I know the price of it, what is the incentive to go for 4,000 kilos because nobody is going to buy? I don't have a contract for it. So I think the national systems as part of the enabling and the governance context must look into mechanisms that can be put in place so that we can engage our industry partners and have long-term contracting, at the same time have policy tools that allow us to manage the total hectarage under cocoa cultivation and probably put other part of the old cocoa lands into other cultivars that enhances income diversification. I think Alex Assanvo has also nailed the, as you said, put a nail on the head in terms of transparency, accountability. Certainly, governments also have a responsibility, and I'm very happy to know that it says the 2 major producer countries are looking into national level traceability systems. For years, Ghana has had a certain traceability system. How do we deepen that to the farm gate all the way to the trading partners who buy the beans at the end of the day? And I think the progressive shift from overemphasis on productivity and good practices is the right time. I don't think the barometer is saying good practices is not necessary. Over the last 20 years, the focus has been on that. And this is the time that we have to look at other 2 elements of the 3 pillars on which the long-term sustainability of the sector must sit. And we believe strongly that the EU due diligence framework is only going to be catalytic in terms of being an impetus for all the different players to act. It would not be a panacea in addressing long-term sustainability if we leave the different elements. We must be firing on all cylinders. And if we're able to do so in tandem, I believe in 2 years' time, we may see different dynamics in terms of the conclusions of the barometer study, and we'll be getting closer to our objective of creating a more sustainable cocoa supply chain where the risk is well distributed and not putting all the risk again on the already vulnerable farmer as we see today. So I think on behalf of Solidaridad, that is part of the consortium of civil society organization working with Voice Network, we want to thank everybody on the call, and we hope that development investors, governments, trading companies, cocoa processing companies, farmer cooperatives, and all of us in civil society will put our hands on deck and make sure that we can push the levels of sustainability from all angles in the next medium term and see some dramatic changes in the cocoa supply chain. That's my little submission.
Thank you so much, Isaac. There is so much to talk about. And in fact, there is so much that we have in the Cocoa Barometer as well. I mean, we can't go into all details, but we see quite a few questions coming in. And so we're going to try to answer one or two. Probably Isaac and myself will answer a few here, and then we'll also leave some for you guys to answer in Accra as well. Norbert asks around, what is the level of living income? Is it just barely enough to survive on? I think that's a really good question, Norbert. And sometimes when you've been doing something for as long as I have, you sometimes forget to talk about the definitions. And so living income is more than just a subsistence level. Living income is the level that is sufficient to actually meet your reasonable needs, not just your bare minimum needs, but to make sure that you've got decent clothing, decent housing, decent food, access to the social services that you need, as well as a little bit of money for savings when things go bad. Having said that, I was once in a meeting a few years ago with the former director of the IDH International Sustainable Trade Initiative. And he said, guys, why are we talking about living income? Living income is shit, is what he said. And everybody was like, but he's right, because nobody really aspires to a living income. And I would suggest that probably 95% of the people in this call, if not 100%, none of us are earning a living income. We're earning more. And actually, living income should not be a finish line or some kind of magical pie in the sky, perfect fairy tale land that maybe someday we achieve in. Living income should be the bare minimum that every cocoa farmer gets. And the good ones should be able to earn a lot more than that. Living income should be the starting point of a conversation and not the finish line. Wouldn't you agree, Isaac?
Absolutely. And that's where Ismail Pomasi's comments were very much on spot. If we don't take into account the cost of production of cocoa, which is so critical, because in any business enterprise, your cost of production is key. If you took out all the cost of production, then you can start building all these margins on top and see what a living income must look like. And that's why, if you look at the current context of macroeconomics in over the world, and also in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, a 21 or 30% increase in farm gate price, nominal increase, may not reflect the reality in terms of real income disposable to the farmer, because then you're talking of inflation over 60%. So all these things must be factored into. Probably a time may be coming where farm gate prices must be indexed to the dollar or the euro, to make sure that farmers are getting real value for their production. So I do agree with you. We need to have that margin. It's not just subsistence level of income earning. No, it must go beyond that.
Another question asked by several people is looking at things beyond the beans, or looking at kind of processing further downstream and bringing in more processing to Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, more chocolate production. And I'm sure Leticia might have a few things to say. She's a chocolate maker and not just a cocoa farmer. And I've actually earlier this year had the pleasure of having some of her excellent chocolate as well. I actually think that more processing or finding additional value outside of the cocoa bean is not the solution to the farmer poverty issue. And the reason for that is, if you look for your solutions elsewhere, then you're kind of outsourcing your problem as well. And I think cocoa itself must be remunerative. And we need to challenge some of the political things that are around this, because if you do find ways of getting money through things outside, but you don't challenge how the risk and reward are distributed, how your purchasing practices, both in the de-risking for the farmer and the higher price, if you don't challenge that, then what you'll see is that this diversified income will lead to buyers being able to put even more price pressure on the farmer to further reduce their costs. And this is what we've seen in every agricultural commodity over the last 200 years, is that every improvement in efficiency has only helped the farmer on the short term if it doesn't get coupled with a structural change in risk and reward. So yes, it's interesting to look at processing. Yes, it's interesting to look at kind of how can you diversify income even from the bean itself. But unless you challenge how the purchasing practices are done in the medium term, that will only lead to lower prices for cocoa farmers. So we need to challenge the purchasing practices as well. Clement Akapani asks, so how do you get the incentive to then shift some of that burden to the governments to drive that change in purchasing practices. I think that one of the best ways to challenge a government to change is political pressure and voting and things like that. But we're also seeing more and more, there's also a paradigm that takes place. When a few countries are doing something, other countries will come on board. And I think that we're seeing two big paradigm shifts at the moment. One is around the willingness in consuming nations to regulate. Like when we wrote the last barometer just 2 years ago, we were very saying, we really need legislation. And in the last 2 years alone, we've seen a major step forward in that, with either commitments to regulate or even texts. And that's been a major step forward. And the second big paradigm shift is the Ivorian and Ghanaian government taking back some of that colonial structured power in Europe and the States and saying, hey, you know what? We're actually also in charge of the price here. And we're going to push that. Now, I've got a lot of comments around how the lid is being implemented. It must be coupled with supply management. It must be coupled with more transparency. But the fact that it's trying to wrest away some of that decision-making power away from London and New York and bringing it back to Accra and Abidjan, I think is an excellent way forward. Have you got something short to add to that, Isaac?
I agree to all the points you've made. So part of the pricing conversation must also cascade to governments.
Yeah.
Because if at the end of the day, if there are hidden taxation systems that reduces the percentage of the FOB price going to the farmer, we could come back to square one. And we need to make sure that governments are also setting up mechanisms to reduce their own cost of managing the sector, so that more and more percentage of the FOB increases as a result of the price goes to the farmer. We're not saying that government has no cost. Governments have cost. If you take away the regulatory system, how it manages the quality control, there are costs associated with that. But there can be smart ways of managing such that the increases, the additional price increase do not end up at that level, but really cascades massively to the farmer to create incentive that we're talking about, and also the de-risking along the supply chain.
Super. Obed, back to you. I realize we're running out of time. For all of the listeners, we're going to go on for another 15 minutes. So there's going to be a round of Q&A still in Ghana, after which we will round off. So Obed, back to you.
Thank you very much, Antonie and Isaac, for those brilliant interventions. So now back to the room. If anybody has a question or intervention for either our panelists or those online, please, you put up your hand. Can I get somebody with a microphone that will go around? Yes, great. So I saw Kwame, then we'll come to Bosby and then Humphrey. So we'll take 3 questions in the room. So Kwame, please, can you bring the microphone to the front? Yes. No, you can take the microphone, please. Kwame, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been going through the report.
Can you please introduce yourself? There are people online. I call you Kwame, but people might not know you.
Okay, so the name is Kwame Asumedu. I work with Per Project. But the question I'm going to ask, I don't know if it's, I think I want to ask based, for myself and not from the organizational standpoint. Being in this field for over a decade, I see farmers, I'm coming to talk from the environmental point of view. Farmers have invested much of their time in agroforestry projects. Companies are now beginning to make claims on carbon from some of these things. Now, I'm thinking, I don't know if anyone is also thinking about that, but whilst I was looking at the report just now, I saw carbon valorization components, which is great that is there. But I'm thinking we are looking at ways to increase revenue for cocoa farmers. Have we begun assessing ways that we can develop concepts, methodologies, or modalities which allows farmers to also make extra income from the carbon credits that the companies are going to make? Because by they investing in agroforestry and sustainability initiatives, they are also making positive impact on the consumers. And I believe farmers should also have a way, and I think it comes back to policy, have a way to tap into that to increase revenue streams coming to farmers. I don't know to what extent that is being looked at, and if it's not being looked at, I think it's high time we look at that, because that is the way we're going to go, and it's better to have the farmer in mind with all of these things happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwame. Yes, we will take a few more questions so that the panelists can respond to them. Busby, yes. Can I get somebody to help me with the microphones, please? Okay,
thank you very much. My name is Bosman Owusu, and I work for Solidaridad. So the insight you gave to the real situation with farmers is very interesting. I'm wondering in my mind, what really then keeps farmers in place now? So if you can give us a sense of why some are still farming as cocoa farmers in spite of all these situations. And when it comes to you, Alex, I think is also very useful. Some have questioned the motive of governments in pursuing the LID. They suggest that you have not, the government have not actually led to your own bidding when it comes to providing the right price to cocoa farmers traditionally. So they see your quest to pursue the LID and making sure that it is paid to these farmers as a pretext to really get a large chunk of the money to yourselves. This comment that will come from some farmers. What assurance can you give to farmers and others who are sensitive to the need for farmers to have this, and that your intentions are genuine?
Thank you very much, Bosby. There was a third hand. Humphrey, was it you? Yes, please, can you give it to Humphrey? Then after this question, we'll come to the panelists. The 3 questions, then we'll try and address them. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Humphrey. You see, I'm from Fantiakwa Cooperative. It brought up to my mind how we define the word sustainability and also the value chain. I think the farmers, to my farmer perspective, I see the farmer as the sources of the supply chain. Because where there is no farmer, there might be no cocoa beans, no cocoa tree, neither chocolate. It seems always we put that on the farmers. I want to know from you what the industry players have commitment to sustain the industry. Because if you have a commitment, you'll be able to assess the situation of your counterpart or your partner and assess his need, and also come out with the policy that will sustain that person. Within the presentation from the presenter, he talked about racism. Racism, we see the farmers are still being racist as far as pricing is concerned. Okay. Because all industry players are living well, with the exception of the farmers. Because they see the farmers as vulnerable people, they don't have the experts, they don't have the intellectuals to come up with their own policies and programs. So they have taken that advantage to put upon the farmers, and they are not caring their living or their sustainable life. So I want to know from the industry players, are they committed to work with the farmers or not?
Okay, thank you very much, Humphrey. So these are 4 interesting questions. I think the first was about carbon benefits and how policies are being put in place to ensure that farmers benefit. I don't know who will handle that for us. Great. So Alex will handle that for us. Then probably, Alex, you also take the question on the LID and then the government's management of inflows. So the question was about LID and pricing and how governments, it looks like a double standard. You are asking LID, but for a very long time, even the resources that come to you, how you disperse it. And forgive me, I keep saying you, I don't mean you, I mean the government. Yeah, so that question, thank you.
Thank you, Obed, and thank you for the questions. So on carbon credits and all these elements, this is being reflected right now. So for the question, yes, there are a lot of reflection. The recent COP meetings in Egypt and also previously in Abidjan and many other places, this point has been raised. So at different level in government, it's not just about cocoa, it's about the country, it's about how do we value our forest and the trees. Cocoa is also a tree. So this is some of the things that are being revisited internally. And secondly, I was very pleased to hear the question on the LID, which for me, it shows a serious concerns, which I also see that there is a need for probably more explanations. So the LID is not going at all in the pocket of the government. At least in terms of mechanism, this is a $400 that is, if we look at the mechanism, is going directly and it's not taxed, not included in any price, is coming at the end of the result or the calculated farm gate price, which is coming from the export price, meaning the link with the world markets. So once everything is being calculated, the LID is being added. So the question you should ask yourself is, what will have been the price without the $400 on top of the result of the farm gate price? Without the LID, you should already make the calculation, $400 per ton minus to the price that have been announced by the two countries. This is the reality. So we need to get away from the fallacies, because this mechanism has been put in place to protect the little part of what we are calling the volatility of the price that is going all over. You have to realize that when government announce one price, this is for the entire year, which has been the recent years, push the government to subsidize to ensure that price will be paid to what has been announced 1st of October. So I won't go too much into the technicalities because there are other elements that we need to observe. I heard about currency, I heard about different things. These are reflections we are having because it's not just about the countries. This is a market. There are contracts, and these contracts are being developed for years and many years without any proper reforms. So we are exploring it, and this is why I raised earlier. We are putting all the strong heads in this area sector to look at pricing mechanism, to really look at all these elements. What are the things that can be done better? How can we reinforce these things? So I wanted to reassure here, if the LID is not well understood, I'm calling everyone to come to my office, or maybe to call the Cocoa Board and myself in Ghana and the Conseil Café Cacao in Cote d'Ivoire. We can re-explain. But you need to understand one thing. The LID is one element, and this has been threatened the past few years since the LID has been put in place, because there is one other element of the market that I wish the farmer will have asked, which is forming the end price, which is the country premium. The premium that is associated to every country. And Ghana particularly moved from more than 200 pounds premium per ton to minus 150 pounds. This should be your worry, because when we put the mechanism in place, that is being offset by the market. I wished you should join us in this fight. And this is why I call again and I command the civil society to support us by calling the industry to play the role, to avoid leveraging the markets against us. Because this, we have no power. We represent only 6% of this entire value. We represent almost nothing in the international trade market. So the only way we can help farmers is to ensure the protections of the cost of production, a floor price that will ensure us to deliver this farm gate price. So I want to call again your understanding, because I think we are driving ourselves too much into fallacies. The reality is here, And if data needed, if transparency needed, we have to do more to explain that. And I think that's one of the takeaway from some of these questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Assanvo, for the response. I think the other question that we'll ask Pomasi to respond to, that was a direct question to you. Bossman is asking, how are you still in business? How are you still able to survive with all the challenges with inflation and all that? What is keeping you in business?
Thank you very much. I think that to attempt your question, I will say that nothing at the moment motivates the farmer to be in business. But if there is something left, then maybe it boils down to two factors. One will be lack of opportunities. If there are any other opportunities for the farmer, definitely the farmer would want to exploit. And it has some opportunities are being, entering the market as we speak now. We can talk about farmers going into other forms of farming, like rubber, plantation, citrus, and all of that. So rubber is a bit lucrative as compared to cocoa farming at the moment. And you see, when you go to the Western enclave, you realize that some farmers are even cutting down cocoa farms and started planting rubber, and it's not good. Here we are talking about sustainability. We have to protect the tree. But if the practice in the field is not motivating for the farmer, he would definitely look out for other opportunities. Number two will be some level of cultural heritage. Some farmers don't want to just stop doing what forefathers or fathers or our grandfathers have left for us. I think that if my father has given me land to farm, and I start selling it, for me, I don't think I'm being fair to my father because he didn't sell. And I would wish that I protect that, cultural heritage. But if I'm looking at the business point of view, I'll be forced to look at something else. I will not stick to just protecting the heritage being given to me when it's actually making losses for me. Whatever my father is in his grave, he will not be happy to see me, involving myself in an unproductive, sector. During their days, it was good for them. That was why they were able to build those mansions. When you go to the cities, the nice buildings that you see, they were put up by cocoa farmers. At that time, farmers were not getting 6% of the value of the industry. They were really getting more. So whatever he is in his grave, if tomorrow he sees me cutting the cocoa tree to start something else, I don't think that he'll be annoyed with me. He will just see that I'm being prudent. So that's how it is. It's not that we feel so okay, but I also feel that when you give birth to a bad child, you just don't kill him. You just hope and pray that situations may change him. So that's why we keep talking. We feel that maybe tomorrow our voices will be heard and some needed, reformation will come. That's why some of us, we don't stop doing what we are doing.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Pomasi. So this is what is going to happen. Apparently, those online with the translation and all that, it was up to a certain time. So we will sign off with the online people and we will continue the conversation in the room for about 15 to 20 minutes before we wrap up. So I will give the opportunity to Antonie to sign off, and then there are a couple of questions that we will attempt to respond to here. Those online, those who can continue to join us, you can join us and we'll continue the conversation. So Antonie.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be able to have this really rich conversation. And it's been a pleasure to work with a huge amount of people to get this barometer off the ground. This is definitely a team effort. We've got 29 member organizations that help develop the Cocoa Barometer. voices from Cote d'Ivoire, from Ghana, from Europe, from the United States, from Australia, from Japan, from Latin America, from literally around the world. And it's very much a team effort. What we try to do with this is every 2 years to dip into where are we and where do we need to be going? And we need to be going to a place where we look at structured change of the system, changes in governance, changes in purchasing practices, not just changes at farm level. And that's a real challenge that we need to go into. We need to make sure that women are centered in the conversation. But I actually think that probably the strongest words are the words that Ismail Pomasi was just saying. We go on in the hope that one day we will be heard. And I think hearing the voices of the farmers themselves being at the center of this conversation, that I think is how we need to move forward here. And so I thank everyone for being involved in this. For those of you in Ghana, for those of you, Isaac joining us here in Montpellier, hoping that we can continue this conversation going forward with more and more the voices of the people who are affected heard first and strongest. So thank you very much. And we look forward to discussing with all of you in the coming 2 years around this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antonie and Isaac, for the intervention from Montpellier. And we will continue the conversation. I can see that there are still over 170 people online. And so we will continue the conversation just for a few more minutes, then we'll wrap up from here. So any other question? Humphrey, I didn't forget your question, but unfortunately we don't have a private sector person on the panel to respond to that. So we will put that in the fridge, and maybe at a later time, we will try and address that on a different platform. So we will take another set of questions. No, Kwame, your question was responded to by Mr. Assanvo, and he made references to what happened in COP27 and all and that cocoa trees are trees and that they need to be treated as that, and that there is a need to begin policy formulation. I mean, he responded to it. Great. So just last set of questions, then we will wrap up.
All right. I have the mic.
Yes, please.
All right, thank you. My name is Alfred with EcoCare Ghana. So my question goes to the farmers. Can they help us with the cost of production per an acre? Can the farmers tell us how much it costs to produce cocoa now, considering everything that is happening in our country? Can they help us with the cost of production? My second point will go to the executive, Mr. Assanvo. So it's not really a question, but a plea that you could inform the regulators to be a little bit collaborative with civil society, because I know they are doing a lot, but sometimes we don't even know what is going on. So we would plead that they collaborate with us, they attend our meetings, they invite us to their meetings so that we could all work together to help our cocoa farmers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Fred, you're supposed to ask one question, you asked two. I'll take from you, then the last one from Mr. Champon and my friend here, and we'll wrap up.
Thank you. So I want to find out if it is fair for multinationals to set up cocoa purchasing companies. Doesn't it infringe on the laws of Ghana and the Ivory Coast? Because what we see is that the Netherlands and other companies, foreign companies, come to set up these companies. Fine, they may be the buyers, but should they come to Ghana and start buying the cocoa, competing the space with indigenous people? Is it fair? And talking about investment in cocoa sector processing, what is African Development Bank doing? Have you contacted them? What policy direction do you have to change the dynamics? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll take Mr. Tue Champon and my friend here, then I will go online and check if there are questions, and then we'll wrap up the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity given to me. You also thank you are making for the farmers. But my question is, What effort are you also making to help the farmers cooperatives to join hands together so that there will be a one union so that you can also rally behind your effort making? Because it seems right now we are farmers cooperative, but the farmer cooperatives, they are individual farmers cooperative. You don't have national one. It's like what we have in the country now. We have national unions and other union employment, but we, the cocoa farmers, we don't have. Don't you think that if you help the cocoa farmers cooperative to come together as one union, the effort that you are making, I think, will be far simpler and easy.
Great. Thank you very much for that question. Then the last question to you, my friend.
All right. I'm Abdul Razak. I'm with Cocoa Abrabopa, a farmer. My question, Executive Secretary of the LID.
The Cote d'Ivoire Ghana Cocoa Initiative.
Yes. It's not being the only person, but I believe he collaborates with the government. As a cocoa farmer, I hardly get information on what goes into pricing. The final price that they give to us. I sit in my village, I go online, I see exchange rate. I calculate what is the price. And I see that I'm getting a little over 1/3 of what is being paid on the international market. And he is also adding that this price includes the LID, which is not quoted on the international market. So how do I get the information as to what goes into the pricing so that I will not be making unreasonable demands? And I will also understand why I'm getting what I'm getting. I think farmers needs to be given that respect and be informed of what goes on into the pricing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my friend, for that very, very important last question. So there are 4 questions in this round, and it appears, Mr. Assanvo, most of them are directed at you. But maybe we will take the first question that went to the farmers. Cost of production. Does anybody, probably not only to those on the panel, but even to all of you here, farmers that we intentionally invited to this event, can somebody, the questioner is asking if you can tell us how much within the current economic system, how much your cost of production is vis-a-vis probably on an acre or a hectare, and then just opposing it with the cost of cocoa beans.
Thank you. The farmers here will bear me a witness that these days, though they've increased the price of a bag of cocoa, the inflation has taken everything. Even the fuel that you use to spray, the weeding, the laborers, we are competing with the galamseyers, and the laborers prefer going to the galamsey site to the cocoa farm. And in fact, this is even causing for how do you call it, child labor. If you have your children in the house, they are eating, you are clothing them, you are paying their school fees, and you have cocoa on the farm. You have to crack the cocoa, you have to how do you call it, harvest it, and you can't get labor to hire. And you have a child aging 17 years, 16 years. Do you sit down for your cocoa to get rotten on the tree? No. Definitely, it has become a necessary concomitant for cocoa farmers to ask their children to help them. Sometimes you plead with them. Today is Friday. Maybe it's going to be a day for games. Why don't you go and help me? This one is not like you don't love your child. It's something that you need to do to feed your children, to cater for your house. So sometimes you are forced to take your children to assist you, not to punish them, not to harm them, but the situation demands that you use them to assist you. And This all come about as a result of insufficient income or revenue from the production. You spray 3 times in the year, and yeah, you weed, you prune. Pruning for 1 acre costs 500. And if you want to do it well, you may have to do it twice in the year. Spraying, you spray not less than 3 times, and each spray for 1 acre costs 200 Ghana. If you want to compete with the galamseyers. Collection of cocoa pods after harvesting it, a day, one person would take 70 to 80 Ghana, and you have to cook for the person. That will cost you 100 Ghana. When you are harvesting, he will harvest from 8 to 12 o'clock. He will take 100 Ghana. Weeding, 1 acre costs 300 Ghana. Have I mentioned spraying? Yeah. Fertilizer, 1 bag. This year, Cocoa Board supply fertilizer. I didn't get even a bag. I didn't even know which fertilizer was supplied, whether Sasiria, cocoa feed. So I have to buy my own fertilizer. And 1 bag costs 400 Ghana. 1 acre will take 3 bags. As a woman, if I'm drying in the night, the thieves are all over. I'm afraid. So I have to hire a laborer, a watchman, security. He will take something, not less than 100 Ghana for 3 days. 6 days, 200 Ghana. Abrabopa will take some. The tricycle will take some. It will not take less than 50 cedis to the purchasing clerk's house. Yes. And all this, after calculating all this, you are hitting around 7,200. And if you are lucky and the weather is good, God loves you as a cocoa farmer, then you may get about 10 bags. 10 bags is how much? 8,000. Oh, you 10 bags is 10 bags is 8,000 Ghana. Deduct it. You are left with 800 Ghana. You even get 10 bags. Won't you attend social gathering? How much are you going to use to feed your household? How much are you going to use for your clothing? Are you not going to buy fish? The cocoa farm is now 10 years. Do you have plantain and cassava on the farm? You are going to buy all those things. What about your Wellington boot? Have you catered for your cutlass? No. How do they call it? Go to hell. You buy now the go to hell is 20 Ghana.
The one that used
to the device that we used to plug the cocoa. So as a cocoa farmer, if it's not hope and faith that maybe one day things will get better, will you continue to stay? Would you give your land for galamseyers? Wouldn't you divest or cut your cocoa for rubber? Wouldn't you plant coconut or palm trees?
Okay.
Yes, even if you cut it and you do piggery, I think it will be more profitable. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leticia. And I know, Mr. Pomasi, you want to say something, but we are straight to time.
No, I understand.
I believe in the next 11 minutes, and we want them to be part of this.
No problem. I just want to say something.
Okay, please.
So, there is one important aspect that she left out. I bought the drying mat, 20 feet. Last year, 450 cedis. This year, 900 cedis. You see? So, like the question Alfred asked, for us to sit down here and give you various cost elements, but it's something that we do through observation, and then we normally incur these costs. But I've been asking this question, that if we price the cocoa, what really informs the decision to price the cocoa, that's, amount, say $2,400 or $2,300 per ton. What really informs it? Because I know for any, item, before you price, you look at the cost. And that is why I've been calling for this, that we need credible researchers to actually go into how much it costs the farmer to produce a bag. Credible researchers. So that at the end of the day, you asking me, I know very well when they come to the front, they will be asking us this question. So that when we put it out there, nobody will challenge it. Because once we are mentioning the figures here, somebody will say something and think that, oh no, they are lying. They are not saying the truth. We have like the voice network, for example, coming out with Cocoa Barometer, which is credible. We also have an organization like that will really research into how much it costs the farmer to produce a bag of cocoa and how much chocolates are made out of a bag of cocoa and how much profits is made. And then let's start the conversation and protect the farmer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pomasi.
Obed, yeah, and I also suggest,
Madam Leticia, I beg you, there are people on the line.
Yes. I also suggest that sometimes I will plead with with those who buy the cocoa that they can also come and set up farm management in our community so that they also manage the farm and will be part of it. They take their profit after managing the farm, they pay the cocoa, and then they give the profit to us. I think that one will solve the problem for us. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, there are lots of questions online that had just been forwarded to me, and lots of them, and we don't have the time to go through all of them. But I think the last 4 set of questions were all to Mr. Assanvo. So there were questions of transparency in pricing, what your outfit will do or envisage doing with policymakers to ensure that there's transparency in pricing. And then the question about supporting farmers to unionize, cooperatives coming together, what kind of support is government or the CIGHCI going to provide for farmers? The other questions are more to government. The AFDB support and all that are more to government. And so those are the 2 questions, I think. Then there is this online question I want to really put to you before, and then you have the last word. I'll read it out as it is. Mr. Assanvo mentioned working on what price would work or help. That would be super helpful for those who are on the advocacy side. It is always a concern that the industry is part of the process if you know who is working on it. Yeah, so it's not really a question, but I'm just making references to what your response that you give. So basically, I think with questions, these are the questions that are left. The rest are more on the issues we have already tackled, and I don't want us to revisit those issues anymore. So Mr. Assanvo, you get the last word in addressing the transparency issues and then the governance issues. And one of the key elements of the 2022 Cocoa Barometer was governance policies, good governance policies. And maybe to add to your question, what is your office doing with the various governments to entrench transparency and representation, participation within the cocoa space? I have worked in the forestry space for a very long time, and I know the problem that we had there and how we had to work our way into bringing that kind of collaborativeness. And it goes down to the question that they're asking. To what extent is Cocoa Board CCC collaborating and opening up the space for stakeholders to be part of the governance process?
Thank you, Obed. So yes, there's a lot, but I wish we could have more questions from the online participants. I will try to be short. So the first point is about organization, union for farmers, etc. And I think that's a critical one. And I don't think this is the role of the institution to do that. I wished the farmer should build a much more stronger organization, because we governments, we rely on structure. And I think that's a joint work that needs to be done. I cannot talk on behalf of Ghana Cocoa Board or Cote d'Ivoire, but what I can say is that price setting here in Ghana, there is a price committee. This price committee is not my role to judge the price committee. but this is composed of all stakeholders in the sector. There is even farmer representation. There is the LBCs. Someone asked about why LBCs are being formed by foreign companies. Well, there are also local Ghanaian LBCs, right, that I've been meeting, I've been discussing with. I think there is a lot that everyone has a role to build. It's not my place here to say, well, the committee is good or not, but you have the chance that there is a committee in which representatives are there. So farmers need to help themselves to organize strongly to be part of it. So we also heard African Development Bank, etc. Yes, there are conversations. They're even looking at how to support different reflection of maybe building national, regional exchanges and different things to look about price, but it won't solve the immediate issue for sure. What goes into the price? And I think that's what I heard today, a very critical element. And this is why I said earlier, one of my biggest fights will be to ensure that we get at least the protection of what the cost of production is into the price mechanism. This is critical because this will form a new era where we are going to build something that secure what at least is the cost. This is critical. Then other elements will be added on top of that because there are a lot of requests that are coming. And I think that's part of this expert group we are talking about, really looking at deeply the mechanic, because once you have the cost of production, how this fit into the price mechanism. So that's one of the things I'm working on. And I think in terms of transparency, how this price is being set up, as I said earlier, both countries, in Cote d'Ivoire, you have the barème, very clearly shows what are the different costs until the farm gets, including the LID. In Ghana, there is a price committee, a breakdown, which also shows very well how this is being published. That's something I can also work on jointly with the civil society and the government to facilitate that process where price announcements are linked with the publication of what the price breakdown is. And I think that's some of the things we need to work together because transparency is critical. I said earlier, we are committed to drive transparency because if this is what making your cocoa cheap, we are making sure that this will be an element that will make your cocoa being higher. And I think that's a critical element. And the initiative has been there for less than a year in function. And we hope, and I think I'm very, very confident because very good, strong commitment from the government on the action with regular exchange. And these are the points that are anyway have been raised by the civil society a few weeks ago. And that's element that's also a part of the policy discussion we're having here as government. So I wanted to say thank you. And I don't know, maybe I try to be short so that we can get a few more questions.
Yes, I will ask one more question. So I'm reading directly from online. This is an extreme point, but do Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire have enough leverage to threaten a trade war with chocolate giants? Without the labor of West African farmers, the big chocolate industry is nothing. I'd love to hear the Ghanaian and Ivorian perspective on power dynamics in the industry. So that is one question that was asked. And then the other question is, LID is transferred to a bank which gives a rate of $1 to 8 cedis, whilst on the market is now 15 cedis to the dollar. And the government is still using 8 cedis to a dollar. Can Alex explain why this pricing mechanism exists? So these are the two questions. They are not very clear. So the first question is, do Ghana and Ivory Coast have enough leverage to threaten a trade war with the chocolate industry? It appears in recent times, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, it appears, it might not be so, but that is how it appears on the international market, that Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire is forming a cartel. And I watched this on GWTV, they use the word cartel, that Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire has developed a cocoa cartel that is threatening a war with the chocolate industry. And the question is, do we have the leverage there? the muscles to really go into such a trade war with the industry. Then the second question is about pricing and the exchange rate. And I don't really want to go into the exchange rate because it's such a black hole. But the question is saying that currently, per the pricing that was set, they used $1 to 8 cedis, but on the market is 15 cedis now. And he's asking if you can explain how that exists, why they don't use the market value of the dollar, but they take their own exchange rate at the time of setting the price.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Obed. I think for the first questions,
the trade war, do
yes.
we have the
so trade war? I don't know if this is where we want to be. So, but I can tell you, yes, we have leverage. We have plenty of leverage. One is everyone pretend to do sustainability program. So what is sustainability program if you are not paying well the price that is supposed to be? So that means that this is a productivity program, or maybe this is a social program, but sustainability has 3 pillars. So the way we have seen the situation is that we are telling companies, well, if you are associated to certain practices, then we have the leverage to stop your program. We haven't stopped program yet, but anytime without notice, anyone can be suspended or any program could be blocked. But you have to realize one thing. This is not the objectives, because that will impact farmers, that will impact people. So before we enter this, we have to make sure that we give privilege to the negotiations and discussion. This is why we are in. And we have been raising the point 2 weeks after ultimatum and the deadline. We have seen the market picking up and stepping in. So from this perspective, we are following and monitoring, and certain actors have been engaged even directly with us to show the commitment. So that's one aspect. So I heard something on price reference, etc. But me, I'm new in Ghana. I'm discovering how, when I came in 1 year ago to where I am today, I have to almost double the salary of my employee. So you have to also understand cocoa is being sold in the sales forward. So that means that what we are talking about today, this is the cocoa from last year. So if you sell cocoa from last year, do you want to? So I think that there is a lot of things that need to reform in that sector. This is what I said earlier. We cannot just sit and blame all the time, because we have to reflect what are the mechanisms that can help us delivering the purpose. Because everyone has different views on this and that, a lot of fallacies, a lot of different perspectives. But I'm here, my commitment is to work on how can we develop a mechanism that will take in considerations some of these elements, because not everyone can do this fight. I have the institutional element and power to do that. Now, we talk about national issues. Well, there is also different leverage. And I wish, and I'm commending again, farmers for the great work, but I would like farmers to do more, to be more organized together. Because if you are not organized, it's like everyone is difficult to support you. So these are the things we are doing, and I'm not in a position of blaming. I think this sector has been self-regulated itself for so many years. So many years, everyone has created an optimization of its own. But the countries have been suffering for systems that are not providing the best framework for us. So there are things we need to do, but at the end, the farmer is the one suffering. And for what I heard in terms of cost, this is serious. So we cannot just talk about trying to have 100% sustainable cocoa when we are sitting here and then some people are not even able to eat or to find what they're going to get tonight for the family. Some people have to make difficult choice, whether they will invest in the farm or bring the children to school. But what are we talking about? Yes, everyone has a role, and we are trying to look at how do we make it work. And I think everyone should play the role of bringing the parts to the person. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Obed, this is Antonie.
Anthony.
I am going to have to tell you that the interpreters have to leave. And so we hired them until half an hour ago. They've been working tirelessly for us for 2 hours now, which is great. But we are an organization that also firmly believes in taking good care of our workers and not asking them to work longer than the work hours that were agreed on. So we need to round off here, I'm afraid, at least also for those that are still online.
You should pay them more.
We always try our best.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony. Then we will wrap up because there was a last question to Alex about supply management, but I think it's from Doreen. And I think, Doreen, you are in Ghana, so maybe in another meeting, you will meet Mr. Assanvo one-on-one, and then...
No, but I can give a very quick one. I said earlier,
sure.
Supply management is a very important point, but people are mentioning it like it's an easy game, right? So who are we, government, to go to a farmer and say, sorry, you have to stop planting cocoa? That's not the conversation. The conversation is how do we consolidate where we are? But as we do this, I said earlier, we see massive investment elsewhere. So how can we have a serious conversation about, oh, supply management is a problem, but demand is also an issue? Because we were told COVID is coming, there is problems, etc., etc. 2 years after, all the companies listed, at least we are involved with, from chocolate, from trader, all of them have reported positive profit. And we talk about demand. So, but we were told the demand is reducing. And then after that, we said, we were told COVID, that's why your price is low. But still, 3 months ago, the first quarter, these same companies are reporting positive sales. So the chocolate price has increased by 8%. So I think these are the issues we are talking about. So supply management and demand are critical. But again, how do we ensure that people, they are free to go anywhere to invest where they want? But then how can we invest to produce more cocoa while we still have cocoa here that we are struggling to sell, or at least trying to sell at a good price? So I think this is some of the things we need to discuss. So if it's easy, that's okay. But we as country would like to have a global conversations about this. It's not Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana only. We are the biggest, yes. But because we are the biggest, we want to ensure that we all need to agree where do we want to start and where do we want to stop. But we cannot just have a free conversation while this conversation is happening. Within 2 years, some countries are doubling the production. So we are open for this point, and we are open for this conversation. And the initiative I'm running is also stakeholders willing to be involved in these conversations. And this is where transparency is critical. So we will know very soon where companies are buying, where they're investing, and how they are building the sourcing plan. So that's also part of the transparency we are talking about. So I think that's responding to that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Assanvo, for giving us that response to that question. On that note, we will be wrapping up the launch of the 2022 Cocoa Barometer report, the physical one. We've already launched it online. So when you go to www.cocoabarometer.org, you will find the report. You find the executive summary. You will also find the press release, and then the full report, which is over 128 pages long. Everybody is welcome to go and try. There are 3 versions: the Spanish, the English, and then the French versions. If you are welcome to download and use it. There are a lot of information in there for everybody. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you those online for staying on beyond the time that we agreed on, and also thank you the translators for overworking. Probably we should discuss overtime payment for them as you go along.
You should triple the payment for them.
Yes, we should do that. The last question, logistics. Please, after this event, there will be a small cocktail event at the back there, and then there's a table behind us. They will handle your logistics. So we will go there whilst we're having the cocktail. You can be going there one by one, and they will they will take care of those who are traveling and all that. On that note, thank you very much for coming, especially the farmers who came all the way from Seshi, other from Bekwai and Suhum, Goso, and all that. Thank you very much for coming. This report is for you, and I hope that probably in future we'll have a tree translation of the executive summary so that people can also make references to it. Thank you very much, and God bless everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Obed, for organizing this.
You're welcome, Antonie. Yeah.